So I'd just like to say good afternoon, everyone. And I'd like to welcome my panel, Mark, Ali and Paul, as well as everyone who's joining us this afternoon to discuss our consultation, The Future of Rapid, What Could an Expanded Role Mean for England's Water Infrastructure? There is a poll that should be in the chat shortly, just to give you opportunity to let us know what you would most like us to focus on today. And there will be one at the end as well, just to check that we've covered everything. My name's Cheryl Steventon. I am a director in Rapid, and I will be your chair for today. And if I just start with a piece of housekeeping as well, I'll be recording the first part of this session before the audience question and answer session. So if there's any IT issues or anything like that, hopefully you'll be able to catch up afterwards when we put the link on our website. So, as I'm sure you know, RAPID, or the Regulators Alliance for Progressing Infrastructure Development, is a partnership of the three regulators, Ofwat, the Environment Agency and the Drinking Water Inspectorate. We work with stakeholders to support strategic resource option major projects, such as reservoirs, water recycling, desalination and transfers, helping the sector to respond to those long-term water challenges. This webinar is to support RAPID's live consultation on its future role. The consultation responds to the Independent Water Commission or CUNLIF review and the subsequent government white paper, which asks what an expanded or strengthened RAPID role could mean in practice. We really want to stress and make the feel of this webinar open and conversational. It's really to help inform and test ideas and encourage better consultation responses. So in your consultation responses, we're looking for evidence, challenge and practical examples wherever possible, including where you think RAPID should and should not extend its role, or where safeguards are needed. And if I'd just like to start by introducing my panel, first of all, Paul Hickey, who is the Managing Director of RAPID for the last probably just over 5 years now. He brings a wealth of experience both from RAPID, but before that at the Environment Agency, and prior to that working for Anglian Water. In a moment, I'll pass over to him and set the scene with a few short slides about the consultation we're running, which is currently open for responses. And I'm also delighted to say we're joined by two guest speakers. So Mark Fletcher from Arup, who is a fellow director and global water leader at Arup and previously chaired British Water, the representative body for the UK water industry. He also brings senior expertise in water infrastructure, resilience and sustainable delivery and cross-sector systems planning. And also Ali, who is the water policy manager at the Wildlife Trust and chair of Blueprint for Water, a coalition of environmental organisations working to improve water policy. She brings senior expertise in environmental outcomes, nature recovery, catchment planning and water sector policy. So that said, without further ado, I'll pass to Paul to give us an overview of the consultation itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. I'd like to start by just saying a massive thank you for everybody engaging in this webinar. We appreciate how busy everybody is, so it's really great that you found time to engage with this. And I will say this again later on, but we generally do want to get people's views on what's good, what's not so good, and so we can improve going forwards, not just through this transition period, but as we think about the formation of the new integrated regulator. So just then to skip on a slide, so in terms of the consultation, I mean, it's very much building on what Cheryl said. We've been going, RAPID was actually formed in 2019. I joined in 2020, just before COVID struck, actually. So that was a very strange period to set up an organisation. But we then had 17 projects. We've got 30 major infrastructure projects now that we're overseeing. And in the consultation, we really talk about 4 key areas. Firstly, how and if RAPID should engage with what we call system planning. So this is to provide greater national oversight of the programme, potentially intervening to optimise the programme, akin, if you like, to the role that the National Energy System Operator, NESO, plays in the transmission system. We do a little bit of that now, but we would need a more formal mandate to move into that space, and provide, as I say, that oversight of the programmes from a sort of coordinated perspective. The second element is to be really curious, what could we do to better advance the projects? We have a gate process at the moment, which we've recently overhauled and brought in the sort of commercial aspects of what looks at, as well as the technical aspects that the rapid gate does. So we've got an integrated process. But is there more that we can do to shift the dial in terms of enabling these projects? We're talking the consultation perhaps about the relationship with the spatial planning process, but obviously we need to be very careful that that doesn't introduce any process risks. And if there's any other sort of regimes that we might usefully engage with to help the projects get over the line. The third area is around the criteria. We did set out with some quite specific criteria for projects to qualify to be part of Rapid, not to be pedantic, but just so that there was a logic to why we're choosing these projects. And they were partly about complexity in terms of both technically of the scheme, but also organisationally. So typically the projects involve more than one delivery partner, which is quite new to the sector since privatisation. We haven't really seen projects like that. But are there other criteria that we might usefully use to bring in projects that might benefit from this sort of cross-regulatory oversight? And again, very open-minded about that. And then the fourth area is something that was touched on the Cunliffe review, whether there be merit in Rapid extending to wastewater. And personally, I think that there is an issue there we need to be careful around, because the wastewater infrastructure tends to be much more localized than the sort of these major water supply projects. But you can sort of see perhaps things like where you have a number of projects operating at scale. For example, in London, there's a sort of regional approach to looking at SUDs, whether that might benefit from regulatory coordination. So those are the four areas in the consultation that we're looking for views. There's specific questions, but obviously, as Cheryl said, we're very minded to people going beyond the specific questions that we've asked. Going on to the next slide. I mean, it might seem a bit cute. Why are we doing this? Just to reinforce the points that that Cheryl made. I mean, it's good practice to reflect, and we've done throughout our life. We have been doing regular rhythm of evaluation, and but as we move into another delivery period, it's good practice just to reflect. But also, as the slide sets out there was specific action in the Cunliffe review for us to consult on this and engage and think about where we could add more value. The Cunliffe review is quite positive about the role of Rapid and saw a case build on that. But I guess going to the right of this slide, we're also very mindful of the work to form the new integrated water regulator. So obviously that would mean that then Rapid wouldn't exist, because most of the component functions of Rapid will exist in that regulator, but the functionality of Rapid is going to be put in the new regulator. So whilst, as I say, this is helping us through the transition period, we're also very keen that it helps in terms of future design thinking, and we're really closely plugged into the DEFRA water reform programme on that. And just moving forward one more slide. I mean, this is just a specific around the selection criteria. We before actually going to consultation, we had quite a lot of pre-engagement with stakeholders, and the sort of themes that people were saying is that it is that complexity point, both organisationally and technically, where this sort of oversight is helpful, and particularly where there's perhaps a different mix. So not just water companies, but perhaps third parties like the Canal and Rivers Trust and Mine Water Remediation, bringing those sort of different worlds together has helped. I guess the other thing we did get a lot of feedback on, though, is to consolidate. Don't rush to expand, do a few things well. So that was another theme that came out of the pre-consultation work. So I think that, going to the last slide, that was really the most what I want to say, apart from, incredibly grateful for people's time, both today and more generally in terms of engaging the consultation. we're really open-minded. We don't want to steer this in any particular direction. We generally want to get people's unfettered views on this, and we're generally very curious about the areas we can improve, because that has been actually one of the sort of guiding principles of our culture, to be curious and open-minded. And we very much enter into this consultation process with that in mind. And you've got a few links there about how you can engage in the consultation. And I was just laughing with Kira about this. We're ending our consultation curiously on a Tuesday, the 21st of July. So that's all I really wanted to say, and just a big thank you. Cheryl, should we take down the slides now so we can all see
Yep.
each other?
Yeah, I think.
There we go.
There
Oh
we
my
go.
gosh, a very large picture of me. That's not very nice.
So, right, thank you ever so much for that, Paul. That was really helpful to hear. And also thanks to those who've sort of put some votes in the chat about what they'd like to make sure we've covered today. So we might cover some of that through these questions, but then there'll be a kind of Q&A session a bit later as well. So if I could start with you, Mark, and just before we get into that kind of future role, it'd be really helpful to hear from you about your reflections of your experience with Rapid to date, particularly from an infrastructure and investor confidence perspective. Where do you think Rapid's added value, and what signal does that coordinated regulatory oversight kind of send to the market?
So, hello everybody, good afternoon. I've got a very positive view of Rapid. I thought really at a time when we've sought some clarity and some focus, whilst we're doubling the investment in the AMP, having Rapid look at the water security programme and the way it's done it it's simplified the governance. I think it's been very effective, and it's built confidence. But it's provided some clarity for the supply chain. It's been clarity for the investors. It's allowed the companies to work collectively with the regulators in what I think is a bit of a sort of exemplar way. And I'm not saying that for the sake of saying it. I'm saying it because I think there's a need for it as we step up investment. There's an awful lot going on in the sector. So I think it's been a positive story when there've been challenges in other areas. I think I've pushed for some time for us to sort of think about how we simplify the governance, how we have more effective governance, and bring in the Drinking Water Inspectorate and Off-Water Environment Agency together, I think has helped to do that. And it allows everyone to get, I think, a little bit more common purpose or common focus around what we're trying to do, and that is solve, or improve the water resilience from a national perspective. So I think my personal view is it's been positive. I always think if something's working well, then build around it. And the timing with us thinking about regulatory reform and what we might do about a national systems plan or whatever it might be. I think the timing for me would help the direction of evolution of Rapid. So maybe that as a start of a 10 there, there's a perspective out there.
No, that's brilliant, Mark. Thank you very much. And Ali, I suppose for you as well, from that kind of environmental and catchment perspective, what are your sort of reflections on how the Rapid role or that kind of national coordination could support some of the resilience?
Yeah, thank you, Cheryl. Well, I think it's interesting to think about this from an environmental perspective because, as Paul set out earlier, a lot of the kind of remit covered by Rapid has been that major water resources infrastructure. And I think people's thinking about that is that maybe the driver is, secure water supplies. It's about servicing the economy. It's about making provisions for growth. But I think equally important within that is the environmental side of things. So if we think about the picture set out by the Water Resources National Framework, that kind of future water need, around half of what we need to kind of secure for the future that we don't have available to us currently is driven by environmental sustainability. It's the need to reduce abstractions or find alternatives in order to reduce pressure on those water bodies that are being harmed by abstraction, either currently or in the future. So the kind of environmental component in there is really central from in how I think about RAPID. And I think there are kind of two environmental components almost to this. There's the fact that water resources infrastructure is needed from an environmental perspective to meet those kind of future sustainability goals. But there's also that these, major pieces of infrastructure, these major projects have environmental impacts of their own. So if we think about, things like reservoirs, the land footprint that they take, the impacts that they can have on habitats and on local water flows. If we think about bulk transfers and the risk that these could potentially pose from a water quality perspective, or from transfer of invasive non-native species. So there are kind of two environmental aspects to this: the need for this infrastructure, but also the impacts that this infrastructure could have. So I think having some kind of strategic view and national level coordination of these major infrastructure projects is quite helpful from that environmental perspective. I think also it has provided an element of sort of legitimacy. We know within the sector that this infrastructure is nationally needed, but in terms of the external perspective, what do customers understand about this? I think it gives an element of confidence in the fact that this infrastructure is necessary, and it's not something that the water sector is proposing and running forward with from a profiteering perspective, for example, which is what some customers might believe. So I think it gives that kind of legitimacy to the process. And I think from thinking about the kind of future approach where we might see these regional water structures, these regional planning functions, and even down to kind of catchment level kind of input into this process, I think that the overview that RAPID has is kind of complementary to that, rather than something that kind of runs over it. I think the importance of this kind of regional view that can look at that oversight for harm, and ensuring that we actually identifying and taking forward the most environmentally protective options, can then be kind of complemented by that local and regional level input that can think about, well, what else can we do to mitigate some of the impacts of this infrastructure, and also what can we do to take it further than just kind of mitigating harm, but actually what are the benefits that we can secure through this infrastructure by delivering schemes that complement each other, that kind of build in added value in terms of habitat provision and so on. So I think there's a real kind of complementarity that we can achieve going forward between the oversight of RAPID and the ability of regional and catchment level stakeholders to input into this process.
Yeah, thank you, Ali. I'm hearing a lot about that kind of wider opportunities really around some of these major projects. So I wonder, Mark, if I could bring you back in just on that sort of theme around the kind of national system coherence and links between that water infrastructure and obviously environmental improvements, but also around maybe expanding it a little bit to housing growth and economic development and agriculture, etc. How can we support that coherence?
Yeah, and I'd agree with what Ali's just said. I think there's, we're all embracing this, thinking much more about not just water as a system, but water as thinking about the dependency and interdependency with other systems, and then looking at how we have to consider the needs of new developments, agriculture and the environment and industry, all of those things much more in the round. Whereas even if we look from a water security perspective, we sort of looked at a part of the water cycle. We haven't looked across the whole. So I think increasingly the idea of a national water strategy that considers what all the water needs are for things like new developments, or housing's a very good example, but we also have a plethora of data centres and industrial needs. And I think we don't have a national water strategy, and I think it'd be an ideal position to be to take this overview of what those national needs would be, but also then look at what those planning needs are and getting more consistency around what we're trying to do. And I mean planning with a sort of little p, how we plan that strategy, and then planning with the big P, how we promote things and accelerate things that in some regions maybe once in a lifetime significant investments or significant impacts. And we always think about what's the challenge, what's the impact. I think we've got to start thinking about also what's the opportunity and then what's the resilience dividend. And if I looked at this through as an environmental scientist or a social scientist or an economist, I look at this, I'd see the different opportunities, all of those things. And I think this will allow us to start to take a more sustainable in a time of deep uncertainties, quite a challenging word, but a far more robust and resilient framework of understanding that I think we all need. So I think that's how I see it, I think, Cheryl.
Brilliant. No, thank you. That's helpful. And I think just to stay with you a moment, because I'm conscious as well in the chat, we have touched a little bit on the sort of system planning, but there's also a question in there that people would like to get to around how we can avoid duplication or sort of mission creep. So I wonder if you've got any thoughts on that at all. So how a rapid style role could add value or most value through earlier optioneering.
So you could say through the let's set out
when you prepared earlier.
And a focused plan. Well, I picked this up at an a rapid engagement process with the investor community, and I thought it was really useful. You avoid duplication, I think, by providing focus, and I think by providing focus to 50 billion or whatever that program is going to be, I think that's allowed the potential for acceleration. Whereas I think if we just lumped it in with the investment that we've already got in the AMP, which was already going to be twice as much as we were normally dealing with, I think was just staring at too much. So for me, there's something about us getting focus, consistency, simplification of governance, accelerated planning, and then taking whatever we learn in that process from a water security perspective and say, well, maybe we should also be looking at where else we could use this without taking our eyes off delivering the value that we're committed to over the next 10, 15, 20 years through that program, which I think is really important. Building on something that's successful or people have got confidence in or that stakeholders are bought into, I think is a really powerful thing just for us to consider. For me, it's practical common sense. But rather than keep reintroducing lots of other things, let's try and work with the things that we've got more effectively. While in this atmosphere of current regulatory reform and simplified governance.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. And Ali, if I could bring you in again, please. So we've talked a little bit earlier around kind of where rapid helps at the moment, but where do you see the strongest case for that kind of rapid style oversight in the future? So potentially around major wastewater schemes or water recycling, etc., or anywhere else?
Yeah, I think it's, as Paul said earlier, it's perhaps more obvious the benefits of having national oversight when it comes to water resources because of the scale of the schemes, the national relevance, the multiple partners involved, often being multiple companies, multiple deliverers. But I think whilst it's perhaps not quite so instantly obvious how that might apply to other aspects of delivery, I think there is a case. And I think if we think about, for example, wastewater, even though it's perhaps more locally executed, I think we can still see that it's a kind of national level challenge. So in terms of kind of public opinion, in terms of things that do have national relevance, so think about the storm overflows discharge reduction plan and the massive scale of delivery that the sector is undertaking in accordance with that plan. If we think about nutrient neutrality and all the wastewater treatment works upgrades that are being driven by that kind of larger scale picture. So I think there are kind of national relevance aspects that we can think about in terms of other parts of water sector delivery. But I'm going to suggest a few things which might not necessarily sort of spring to mind that I think could fall under that description. And I think they could be driven by us taking a sort of wider view of the term infrastructure. So I think if we think more about water as a system, we can think about all of the components of delivery as being a kind of relevant part of what the sector needs to deliver. And going back to the water resources side of things that I spoke about earlier, something that isn't necessarily considered at the moment because it's not necessarily large scale infrastructure, but which is a really crucial part of the process, is water efficiency. So I wonder whether there could be benefits in Rapid having some kind of national level oversight of the water efficiency work that the sector is delivering, because it's so important in terms of our long-term water security. Even though it doesn't have the same kind of characteristics of those large-scale infrastructure projects. And I think particularly if we think about, again, the picture that was set out in the national framework, is that, yes, we need those big infrastructure pieces, but they do more of the heavy lifting kind of further down the line by the time they've been, planned and constructed, come into operation. In the short and medium term, it's that water saving part of the picture which is really doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So I think it's important that we see that is kind of on track. So any kind of national oversight that Rapid could potentially provide there to help steer and shape delivery of that part of water resources could potentially be relevant. And then I think another area, again, which isn't a kind of very prominent part of the picture at the moment, but could potentially be increasingly important going forward, is the role of the natural environment. So one of the things that the sector has been starting to think about quite a lot is the idea of catchment resilience. So alongside all of the kind of asset maintenance and new infrastructure that we need to provide, is there more we should be doing to ensure that our catchments are healthy and therefore they're more able to provide us with water supplies, they're more able to accommodate wastewater discharges, and they're less vulnerable to things like the impacts of climate change? Is there a role that Rapid could have in sort of helping to drive that concept forward? And I think other aspects of kind of natural environment consideration could be things like the Head Start project, which is a really interesting area of work driven by Anglian Water and others, which is looking at the idea of, we have a large number of rural small wastewater treatment works, often in sensitive headwater environments, that don't really fall under the other drivers to deliver upgrades and so on. Is there more we should be doing there that kind of combines what you can do in terms of improvements to those works with what you can do to enhance the catchment and make it more resilient? And so, interesting areas of development there around what we should be doing in terms of enhancing the kind of resilience of our natural environment so that it can better help us provide our kind of water needs. And I think alongside that, perhaps bringing in the views of Natural England, who are not one of the members of Rapid, but have a significant role to play in terms of determining whether water resources, wastewater and other schemes are the right schemes to be going forward in terms of their environmental impact. So bringing in those kind of inputs earlier in the process as well could be helpful through that national level oversight.
Yeah, that's really good. Thank you, Ali. And we do work quite closely with Natural England, but you're quite right. They weren't part of the kind of core original partners, so we can always bring them in a bit more.